The Grumman TBF Avenger was a highly successful naval torpedo bomber that served with the US Navy for 20 years. Its service career lasted into the 1960s, but it was during World War II that it distinguished itself. By 1939, the USN's primary torpedo bomber, the Douglas TBD Devastator, had become obsolete. A number of firms submitted prototypes for a new aircraft, but it was Grumman's TBF that was chosen as the winner. The first prototype, the X-TBF-1, flew on the 1st of August 1941, powered by a Wright 14-cylinder engine developing 1700 horsepower. The aircraft apparently performed so well that the Navy made an open-ended procurement order, meaning the aircraft would be produced indefinitely as long as there was a need for it. And indeed there was, as the TBF served as a frontline aircraft through the entirety of the conflict after its introduction, from early 1942 right through the war's end in mid-1945, and continued to serve for many more years after, until the concept of a dedicated torpedo bomber had become obsolete. The Avenger was the first plane to use a new wing folding mechanism created by Grumman, intended to maximize storage space on an aircraft carrier. The engine used for production models was the Wright R2620 Cyclone, which developed 1900 horsepower. There were 3 crew members, the pilot, the turret gunner, and 1 man acting as radio man, bombardier, and ventral gunner. Initially, there was a single 30 caliber machine gun mounted in the nose, a single 50 caliber machine gun was mounted in a rear turret, and a single 30 caliber machine gun was mounted ventrally under the tail, which was used to defend against enemy fighters attacking from below and to the rear. Later models had no nose-mounted gun, and instead had 1 50 caliber gun in each wing, per pilot's requests for better forward firepower and increased strafing ability. The TBF only had a single set of controls, and no access to the pilot's position from the rest of the aircraft. This meant that if the pilot was killed, or was no longer able to fly the aircraft, the rest of the crew's only choice was to bail out or go down with the plane. The radio equipment was massive, especially by today's standards, and filled the whole area behind the pilot, some 2 feet in length. The Avenger had a large bomb bay for a single-engine plane, allowing for 1 Bliss Leavitt Mark 13 torpedo, a single 2,000-pound bomb, or up to 4 500-pound bombs. The aircraft had overall ruggedness and stability, and pilots said it flew like a truck. It wasn't agile, but it was stable. With its good radio equipment, docile handling and long range, the Avenger also made an ideal command aircraft for Commander's Air Group, also known as CAGs. With a 30,000-foot ceiling and a fully loaded range of 1,000 miles, it was better than any previous American torpedo bomber, and better than its Japanese counterpart, the obsolete Nakajima B-5N. The TBF, officially designated the Avenger in October 1941, was the heaviest single-engine aircraft of the war, some 400 pounds heavier than the huge P-47 Thunderbolt. It was revealed to the public on the 7th of December 1941, which happened to be the day Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. It first saw combat in the Battle of Midway. 6 Avengers were stationed on Midway Island at the time of the Japanese attack. Over 100 Avengers had in fact been shipped to Pearl Harbor for immediate deployment, but the carriers left for Midway mere hours before the planes arrived. The 6 Avengers stationed on Midway didn't actually destroy any Japanese shipping, but they did distract the Japanese Combat Air Patrol, allowing dive bombers to strike at the Imperial carriers. In August 1942, a flight of 24 Avengers took part in the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, destroying the Japanese light carrier Ryujo, and shooting down a single dive bomber at the cost of 7 Avengers. The first major achievement of the Avenger occurred in November 1942, when TBF sank the crippled battleship Hai in the Battle of Guadalcanal. The day before, Hai had been battered by B-17s and was left crawling along at 5 knots, leaking oil. The next day, the Avengers delivered the coup de grace, striking her twice with torpedoes. Shortly after, the captain gave the order to abandon ship, and the Hai was scuttled, becoming the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. It was around this time that the TBF-1C entered production, the variant featured in War Thunder. This model introduced the wing-mounted 50 cals with 600 rounds per gun, as well as extra fuel tanks which doubled the aircraft's range. By 1943, Grumman was phasing out production of the TBF in favour of the new F6F Hellcat, but General Motors continued building the Avenger under the name TBM. While built by General Motors, development continued, resulting in the TBM-3, fitted with a more powerful 1900 horsepower engine and hardpoints for drop tanks or rockets. They also became proficient anti-submarine weapons, claiming around 30 subs destroyed during the war. It was a TBF-1C that sank the Japanese I-52 cargo sub. The I-52 was carrying gold, which was to be delivered to the Germans as payment for technology, including advanced acoustic torpedoes, radar, bomb sights, and even a Junkers Yumo 213 engine as used on the Focke-Wulf 190 Dora. Future American President George W. Bush Sr. flew in a TBM and was shot down in September 1944, but he delivered his payload and hit the target before bailing out. The Avenger played a pivotal role in sinking both of Japan's so-called super battleships, the Musashi and Yamato. The Yamato was hit by at least 11 torpedoes dropped from Avengers, The torpedoes caused widespread flooding which proved impossible to control, and prevented the crew from reaching pumping stations, which would have allowed the Yamato's magazine to be flooded, and would have likely prevented the gigantic magazine detonation, an explosion with a cloud nearly 4 miles high that tore the ship in half. As well as its distinguished service in the United States Navy, the Avenger saw use with the Commonwealth, and the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm, where it served in the Far East. A Fleet Air Arm Avenger is featured in-game as a premium plane. One interesting achievement of a Royal Navy Avenger crewman was the destruction of a V-1 in July 1944. The V-1 rocket was overtaking the Avenger when the rear gunner opened fire at a range of 700 yards. Incredibly, with a single machine gun aimed at a target travelling over twice as fast as he was, the gunner was able to hit and destroy it. After the war, the Avenger continued to see use in anti-submarine warfare. The Royal Canadian Navy used it as an anti-submarine weapon until it was phased out in July 1960, but it continued to see civilian use as a crop sprayer and water bomber. The TBF was an essential part of the US Navy's Pacific campaign, and was central to the destruction of many Japanese warships, including, most important of all, Japan's carriers. Alongside the SPD Dauntless, the Avenger was one of the most important factors in America's ultimate naval superiority in the East. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Reach for the Sky. See you soon.